2 weeks after this conflict, Iran made its most surprising move. It was not a missile, a drone, or any conventional weapon. Instead, it came as a single statement from a senior Iranian official to CNN on a Saturday morning. Iran would allow tankers to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, but only if payments were made in Chinese currency, not in dollars. Just 4 words, only yuan. However, they carry more weight than any explosion or attack in the past 14 days. This is not a military action. It is a direct challenge to the system that has placed the United States at the center of the global economy for half a century. Today, we will break down what this statement means, why it is more important than anything you have seen on television, and what could happen if this expands. When people hear petrodollar, many tune out. It sounds technical, abstract, or like something discussed in boardrooms far from the battlefield. But it is the truth. The petrodollar system is the reason why America can project military power around the world. That is why the United States can have deficits that would sink almost any other nation. Despite the trillions spent on wars, debts, and global operations, the dollar remains the currency that every country must have. Disrupting or seriously weakening that system means that the financial foundation of American power begins to crack. And with this announcement, Iran has just thrown a stone at that very foundation. To understand why this is important, we have to go back to 1971. Before that, every dollar was backed by gold. Every bill in circulation could, at least in theory, be exchanged for gold stored in yuan. U.S. vaults. Nations trusted the dollar because of that guarantee. But when President Richard Nixon ended the gold standard, the dollar faced a question it had never faced before. Why should anyone trust it? The answer came from the Middle East. In 1974, the United States reached an agreement with Saudi Arabia. The kingdom agreed to price all its oil sales in U.S. dollars. In return, America promised military protection. The OPEC followed one country after another, and the global oil market was valued in dollars. The result was remarkable. Suddenly, every country that needed oil, which was all countries, had to keep U.S. dollars on hand. Japan needed dollars, China needed dollars, India, Germany, Brazil, all major industrial nations had to maintain dollar reserves just to keep their energy supply running. This setup created a constant and structural demand for the U.S. dollar. That demand allowed America to borrow freely, spend without limits, and maintain a global military presence that no other country could rival. The petrodollar is much more than just an economic agreement. It is the foundation of American global power. And for over 50 years, it has remained strong because every serious attempt to challenge it has been crushed. Iran is not the first country to try this system. In 2000, Saddam Hussein attempted to shift Iraq's oil sales from dollars to euros. And by 2003, the United States invaded Iraq and oil pricing reverted to the dollar system. Similarly, Muammar Gaddafi proposed a pan-African currency backed by gold for oil trade, aiming to reduce dependence on the dollar. In 2011, NATO intervened in Libya. Gaddafi was killed, and with him, that plan was buried. Later, Venezuela, under Nicolas Maduro, tried to move oil trade away from the dollar and strengthen ties with China. In January 2026, the United States also took action against him. Analysts refer to this recurring pattern as the petrodollar war theory, the idea that countries challenging dollar-based oil pricing face consequences far beyond normal diplomacy. Now, Iran, a nation that has been under attacks from the U.S. for 14 days, has announced that it will reopen the Strait of Hormuz, but only under conditions that completely avoid the dollar. This is intentional. A senior Iranian official told CNN that Iran is considering allowing a limited number of tankers to pass through the strait if payments are made in Chinese yuan. Notice what this implies. Iran is not simply reopening Hormuz, it is reopening it under new financial rules. Terms that exclude the dollar, favor China, and set a precedent never seen before in the 52-year history of the petrodollar system. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, Navy, has already begun issuing what analysts describe as IRGC certificates, permits that allow ships to pass. Iran controls the valve, and now it controls which currency should be used to open it. For China, this is extremely significant. Beijing has spent years working to expand the role of the yuan in global oil trade through yuan-denominated futures on the Shanghai Exchange, swap lines with dozens of countries, and other financial tools. All of this has been leading to a moment like this, a major oil choke point operating in yuan, with Hormuz partially restricted and oil prices rising above $100 per barrel. Countries that depend on that oil now face a difficult decision. Wait for the United States to reopen the strait under dollar-based terms, or quietly accept Iran's condition to use yuan to keep their oil supplies moving. Some are already making their decision. India has received assurances from the Iranian ambassador about safe passage and is considering payments in yuan to secure its energy needs. Turkey faces the same calculation. Gulf nations are redirecting oil through alternative pipelines. But those pipelines can only handle about 2.6 million barrels per day, while Hormuz typically transports around 20 million. This creates a daily deficit of approximately 12 million barrels. That gap gives Iran significant power. Every week that Hormuz remains partially closed, Asian countries feel the pressure and the yuan alternative becomes more attractive. At the same time, China is already buying around 90% of Iran's oil through covert networks operating in Malaysia, Singapore, and Vietnam to avoid sanctions. The financial structure for yuan-based Iranian oil trade is already in place. Iran is not introducing something completely new. It is taking a system that has long operated in the shadows and bringing it into an open and large-scale framework through the world's most critical waterway. So, what does this mean for the United States? The simple answer is that America cannot get out of this situation through bombings. Airstrikes can destroy facilities, eliminate leaders, or damage infrastructure, but they cannot stop China from buying oil from Iran. They cannot prevent India from quietly assessing its financial options. And once a precedent is set in the global energy markets, it cannot be easily undone. The dominance of the dollar in oil trade is not maintained solely by aircraft carriers. It is sustained by habit, trust, and the absence of a practical alternative. Iran, in close cooperation with China, is actively building that alternative, not by defeating the United States through military force, but by presenting the world with a practical solution when the Strait of Hormuz is partially restricted and the demand for energy is urgent. Oil prices have already risen by 47% in just 15 days. Brent crude has reached levels not seen since the peak of the Ukraine crisis in 2022. With each passing day that prices remain high and tankers continue to wait outside the strait, environments are under increasing pressure to find a viable solution. At this moment, Iran is the only actor offering one, on its own terms, in yuan. Here is the reason why this moment is historically significant. For 52 years, the petrodollar system has withstood every challenge because its challengers were isolated. Saddam was alone. Gaddafi was alone. Maduro was alone. None of them had the support of the second largest economy in the world. None of them controlled a choke point responsible for about 20% of global oil flow. Iran has both. And China is not going to invade to stop this. Instead, it will quietly support this shift. Every oil transaction denominated in yuan through Hormuz becomes a data point that demonstrates that oil trade can function without the dollar. And once a precedent like this is set, it tends to endure. Washington understands this clearly. Rebuilding an army is possible. Rebuilding a global financial system, once trust in your currency is affected, is much more difficult. Trump's war strategy focused on projecting strength, demonstrating that the United States cannot be challenged and restoring deterrence. But in this situation, America could win every military confrontation and still lose something much more important: the silent structural power that comes from being the nation whose currency the world cannot function without. That power has never been seriously challenged before until now. Not with China backing an alternative, not with 20 million barrels per day being influenced by a country introducing a new system. 52 years ago, an agreement between Washington and Riyadh established the financial foundation of American global power. Today, in the narrow waters between Iran and Oman, that foundation is being silently challenged. If the dollar survives this crisis, it could shape the global economy for the next 50 years, much more than any missile or drone could.